Welcome to the Tuesday workshop at the Thinker Business Accelerator. It is Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024, the first workshop of 2024. We we have TC Bell here and Paul Edwards. Got a couple faculty members who cannot make it today, but super excited to have you guys. We're going to be talking about intentions and living intentionally. It's that time of year where people set goals. And so I thought maybe what we'd do today is talk about the ways that we set goals. What methodologies do each of us employ? Are we good at sticking to goals? Do we set intentions instead? How do we stay on track so that we maximize the use of the life that we have? So, anyhow, welcome. Anybody like to open us up?
It's
I
gotta
think
be. Go ahead, GC.
I was going to say, I think this topic is timely as we're starting out the year. So I appreciate you being very preemptive and starting us out on the right foot. I know for myself, there's been a time in my life where people used to say I was aggressive to a fault, meaning that I was very intentional about the success level I wanted to achieve in my life. I was also very intentional about the people who are also standing in my way, if you're in my way, right? And throughout life and over the last 10 years, I feel like I've gotten a lot more docile towards my approach. If that's the right term. And I don't want to confuse that, because to me, that's the path to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm not getting complacent, right? I want to make sure that there's a difference between being aggressive towards your goals, sticking to it, and really being tenacious. And also there's a difference between being aggressive to a fault where you're hurting people as you go along, ruining relationships, or leaving people behind and you should be pulling forward. And so for 2024, my goal this year for myself is to, one, live my life on purpose and intentionality, but also ensuring that I'm putting my foot on the pedal a little bit. And so I want to make sure I'm pushing like I did when I was young, man, a little more hair. But also I am a faith-based leader. So I want to make sure that I'm keeping the Lord first in my life. And I want to make sure that I'm not leaving people behind, if that makes sense. I'm doing what I'm called to do.
Yeah, achieving the goals that you have for yourself while not running over people to get to those goals. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Paul, what do you think?
I think he's going to call in. I went through a planning session yesterday. I took Kirsten off guard and I said, hey, this is what I do every year. I do a planning session on New Year's Day where I recap the highlights of the previous year and then set the intentions for the coming year. And I do it I'm packing in my book, but I do it in a couple different ways. Number one is I look at the highlights and then I recap the intentions that I had at the start of the year. And just do a quick assessment. Did I move closer to that intention or did I move further away or did I stay the same? And my intention last year was my focus word, which I'll call my intention, was discipline. And my comment after going through the 2023 highlights was that the highlights that I had in there were not necessarily due to discipline. And what I would have exchanged in any way was I would have taken half of the highlights of last year and sacrificed this word of discipline because it seemed really important at the beginning of the year, but the highlights were not achieved through discipline. The highlights came about in other ways, which is interesting to me, especially as I'm looking forward into this coming year. So the second half of this idea of how I operate, not only the highlights and compare it against the intention, but then I look at two columns, things I want to do and things I want to be. So the B is the character qualities that I want to have developed in my life, ways of thinking, things that aren't binary in nature, like I did or didn't achieve it. It's like, these are things I want to develop in me. And then the B and then the do column are highlighted things that absolutely I'd like to get these things done. Right. So it could be a certain trip. See, people have bucket list items. They have things they want to do, travel items, places to go, people to see.
Sure.
Which are should, I think, to develop some sort of staying power in these, the be and the do columns have to be in some way aligned. Are we doing things, in my case, am I doing things or things on my bucket list, the do items, also developing, moving me in those character qualities, the person that I want to be? Or are they somehow moving in different directions? And so, having gone through all that, now I'm still stuck in the what's my word? What's my focus going to be for this coming year? And I have it's percolating in the back of my mind. But anyhow, that was my planning session yesterday,
We
which will then continue the rest of this week.
So we had a short planning session over breakfast this morning to start our day out on the right foot with one of my team members, Rodrigo.
Mhm.
And we were talking about, out of all the ideas that we had, all the projects that we've opened in 2023, let's find out which ones are most viable, right? And so we actually just did I wouldn't call it a T chart, but we built a simple chart. And we built it based off of, and we ranked each project based off of the open projects, based off of 1 to 3 ranking, 3 being the highest. It was based off investment, authority, time, and result. Result meaning dollars, revenue. And we just went through one by one and prioritized the projects that were open for 2023 so we can close them off with being more intentional. It's just right back to the focus word for today, intentionality. It's not enough anybody can come up with a strategy, but it's the execution where things fall apart. And I think that it amazes me when we come up with these complex plans and then it's so complex that we can't finish the plan. And so it never works. And so I think this year, I want to also focus on simplifying some of the complexities in my business and workflows, processes, just to ensure that we're actually focusing more on execution and getting things done versus let's just have a planning session just to say we did.
Paul, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
What's resonating with you? In the brief moment that you were gone, we were just talking about setting goals for this coming year, how we go about doing that. I was recapping a little bit of my process and talking about being intentional towards working towards some destination. How do you manage all that?
Up until recently, the simple confession is I didn't. And part of the reason was, to me, goals need to have goals. I've done an awful lot of setting goals for the sake of setting goals and had struggled verbally to connect what I laid out on paper that I wanted to achieve to a number of things. One of them was, did it align with my purpose and my mission, but also, was it realistic? And was I in position to actually pursue it? And so often I wasn't, because there was a key missing fundamental for me. So what has come about in the year that you and I have been actively working together has been this phrase, interdependent, the right people. And what 2023 was all about for me was getting a very clear picture of how many of the goals that I wanted to set were simply not ones that I had the skill set to pursue, or I had part of it, but not the whole. And it made it very difficult for me to, after the first set of goals that I set fell through and I didn't achieve a single one of them, didn't come close, I just said, you know what? I don't see the point of this. And now what's been happening for me is we've worked through a number of things. First of all, I've learned that our goals have to be predicated on a couple of different things. One of them is what is not tolerable or acceptable or preferable, because it's hard to know what you want unless you first eliminate what you don't want, right? And then when you get rid of all the things you don't want, then it becomes much easier to define what you do. And then once you do, if it does become true that if it's too small, it's not really a goal. Meaning if you can just achieve it with the flick of a switch, then you're not setting a goal because you're not challenging yourself. But on the other hand, if it seems big, then first question is, can it be broken down into small steps that you can do day by day that work toward it? And if the answer is yes, then that's a worthwhile goal to have. And for example, you and I are putting together these author workshops for Emissary in the next few months. There, by myself, I wouldn't even get past square one with this because of all the organizational details and processes you got to think through, putting together the numbers and projections and figuring out how to time block all of that and organize it and make it happen and market it. That's not my strong suit. And I don't have the time to learn it. But because I'm prioritizing interdependence with the right people, I can take a deep breath and say, okay, then this is a big goal. It's insurmountable by myself, but I'm doing it with the right people. Now all I need to do is figure out what are my small steps I can do every day, hour by hour sometime, to move closer and closer towards fulfilling it. And then when I get there, evaluate in hindsight, okay, how can we achieve that better, more efficiently, whatever next time? But at least it's meaningful and connected to purpose and feasible. And that's really what plagued me for so long. And right now it's a test trial stage because I've never done something like this before. So the jury's still out until we actually get there and hold the events. But I for one would be very gratified if we get to the finish line on these events and we achieve even half of what we set out to achieve.
One of the things that stands out for me with what you're talking about, I love this idea of interdependence with the right people, because sometimes we become stuck in achieving our own goals because we are in need of something that someone else has. And if we never ask, we never receive. And I think that moves back to intentionality, that if we choose to live intentionally and set goals out ahead of ourselves, it has a mysterious way of aligning all of the resources and the relationships that we have, because now we begin to see what we're looking for. And that's a well-known psychological premise that people see what they're looking for. And we can talk about being clear, setting clear goals, manifesting, repeating something every morning. People have all sorts of disciplines that they ascribe their success to, but a lot of it, I think, boils down to you see what you're looking for. And if we look ahead into the future, these are things I'd like to do. These are things I'd like to be. These are maybe habits I'd like to establish. Our brain goes into problem-solving mode and begins to create that future for us because we were intentional about it. And when we're not intentional, then whatever comes, and we are forced to live with that. I think there's a quote, and I don't remember what it is, but quote by somebody famous, which basically is like, you can create life, or it's going to be created for you. And that couples with the old saying, the difference between those who do and those who don't is those who do and those who don't. And it's really, in a lot of ways, that simple. The people who do go off and do, and the people who don't, they just don't. And that, I think, leads back to what did you intend? And if you intended nothing, then you rightly received nothing.
Paul, when Paul was speaking earlier, I just want to say his comments were really, really open and transparent. I can definitely appreciate I've been in that space before. I agree. Interdependence is the best way. I tend to do more. And I'm going to ruin this story, but you probably heard this before. It's a story of I think it's a Clydesdale horse, the big Anheuser-Busch horses, right? One of them, they say, can pull, I don't know, let's just call it a ton, right? But if they put two horses together, the two horses effectively pull 3.5 tons, say, for instance. And the long exponential growth starts to happen. if I'm going to take it one step further, when two or more are together, right? And you have that exponential growth factor. And then the other thing I want to comment is when he was saying interdependence, it reminded me of this guy. I'm sure we've all read this book before, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And on page 144, you have the chart of the interdependence, independent paradigm, right? And what it talks about is that think when factor. When you have people around you who are constantly thinking not just about how they can help you win, but you're also thinking about how you can help them win. That is just a great synergy to have between someone else. I work best with people who want to see me do better, right? My clients that are rainmakers for me, evangelists, if you want to say evangelists for me, I do my best work for them because every chance they get, when they're in front of someone, they're not afraid to say, I want you to meet this person, placing you in front of the right people, saying your name. That's what I say my name when you're in the room, right? I want to work with people who are like that. And so I think, Paul, that's what you're getting with you and Jason. You have that interdependence, that synergy working because your relationship doesn't rely on one of you helping the other more than you're helping them. You're doing it out of selflessness. You're helping each other to grow. So so I know the story about your relationship. I've spoken with Jason. So I think this has been just great for both of you. It's amazing to see the things you guys have done in the past year or so.
The thing is, both of us realized there were things that there were tasks, there were roles that I just lacked the skill set to play. And and Jason had things that maybe he had the skill set to do it if he really could block out everything else he was doing. But given the things that he is doing, A, he hates doing them. And then B, they take way more of his time because it's that much more concentration he's got to put into it rather than doing the stuff that comes naturally to him, which conveniently is the stuff that doesn't come naturally to me. Yeah, you're right. And the point about the Clydesdales is excellent. I believe that the old African proverb goes, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, go together. And that's what I'm looking for. Distance. I tried speed, right? Not the drug, but I tried getting to financial success as fast as I could and crashed and burned easily. But if I aim for distance, I'll get there. And at some point, I'll turn around and realize where I'm at, I think probably without even having paid much attention to it, which is the best kind of success there is, right? It's the greatest, one of the greatest things I've ever experienced was realizing that I had a certain net worth long after I had acquired it, long after I had achieved it. I just turned around one day and somebody put a sheet in front of me and said, hey, what's your net worth? Let's put it all down on paper. And I had never done that. And so when I sat down to do it, thought about these numbers and I had to look up some stuff and all of that. And then I realized, whoa, I'm actually doing way better than I thought I was. And that was a product somewhat intentionally of going together with the right people. In this case now, I actually have the game face on to go with the right people, which makes it, I wouldn't say more daunting, but I would say it's engaging me more consciously than I have in the past and causes me to pay more attention. But I can see enough of the trees for the forest to say, I think I'm going to have a similar moment where I turn around and I realize, boy, we have achieved those goals. We have hit some pretty impressive numbers and we have some great rewards to enjoy.
One of the things that comes to my mind as you're talking about turning around and just realizing what you have, what's been accumulated through the years, whether it be financial assets or stuff, resources, connections, wisdom, reminds me of David from the Bible. Since this faith-based business accelerator, we talk about these things. David, at the end of his reign, and he's going to pass the kingdom on to his son, At the end of David's reign, there's a little section in the Bible talks about David numbering the fighting men. He counts his army. He essentially takes a census of the stuff that he's got, which from a leadership standpoint seems really smart. Who doesn't need to know what they have? And yet, God is not happy. God is not pleased with David for counting the stuff that he's got. And I want to emphasize in that there's this heart change that can come about or should come about in us, where we don't accumulate things for the sake of displaying to everyone else how much stuff we've got and look what we've done. However, that doesn't mean that we don't know that it's there and don't know how to utilize it best. We don't just ignore it. But I think it gets back to intentions. If we are accumulating or setting goals because for ourselves, I think that is perhaps I think that develops in us matters of the heart that don't need to exist. It maybe a selfishness starts to develop. Whereas if our intention is to do good for others, to make a positive impact for our family, for our friends, for our extended relatives, for each other, I think it changes our maybe it gets back to motivation. I think that develops in us a softness of character, the more positive qualities that we would want to develop. And so I don't know. My brain's a little bit lost in all that, but I think it gets back. What resonates for me is all of the things that we have are provided to us, not because we don't have a hand in it. It is up to us to do something with the talents that we have and the resources that we have. And as we're faithful with little, we're given much. And when we look back and go, look at what has happened, are we saying, look at what I did, or are we saying, look at what God did? And that was the issue with David. He was saying, look what I did. Look at the stuff that I've got. And God was displeased with his heart. So I think when we set intentions, at least for me, that B column is super important because those are the character qualities I want to develop. The do, somebody else might look at those doings and go, look at what he's trying to do. And I look at the B column and go, yeah, but that has nothing to do with anything. Here are the character qualities I want to develop in me, which, getting back to working together in a partnership type of arrangement, rising tide lifts all boats. I want you to do great. I want you to have an increased net worth. I want you to have all the things you want. I would like me to have all the things I want to. And those things I think are better done together than apart. If just for the heart that is developed when we seek the best for one another rather than just for ourselves.
So it reminds me of, I read a lot, but it reminds me of a page out of Simon's book, Start With Why, where he talks about, specifically it says, just read it here, right? You can see the highlighting. He says, after you have clarity of why, are disciplined and accountable to your own values and guiding principles, and are consistent in all you say and do, the final step is to keep it all in the right order. And it reminds me of what you're saying. I think a lot of times, a story came to my mind when you were talking, Jason, about how they did a study of people that they made run up a hill, hiking or something. And one group, they told that something was happening to their children or something like that, or the children needed them. And though the group that they told that their children needed didn't stop, they made it further. The group that they just were going up the hill for themselves, they obviously didn't want to race. And I think one of the things I always try to do is to, when I wake up in the morning, is to really be grateful and thankful, right? I try to make sure that I'm thankful for my children, for the people around me, the relationships, because I think that it helps me to build a frame around and center myself around the purpose and why. What good does it do for me to be intentional about my net worth when I don't know what's going to happen when I get there, right? What good does it do for me to say, oh, I'm going to have one of the largest marketing agencies that focuses on mission-driven leadership and telling their story, when in reality, I don't know what's going to happen once I do. And so I think now that you're saying the intent of David's heart, God said, is a man after my own heart. The intent, being intentional shouldn't just be our actions towards our goals, but I think to reframe how we're speaking about intentionality should also be, are we focused on our purpose and how does that affect other people around us, or AKA the kingdom, right? And so this is a great conversation right now. I think this is really helping me to ensure that I don't start the year out just trying to make a bunch of money. Right? Okay, TC, go. And you're running and you're off to the races. But at the same time, you win the race, and what changes, right? You still have the same problems. You just have more of it. You still have the same stuff. You just have more of it. If you look at the world today, just while we're talking about stuff, you said accumulating more stuff is a sign of success. If you think about it, if I go into a friend of mine's house and let's say their family's household income is $65,000 a year, right? They have the same exact things that they have a bed, I have a bed. They have a couch, I have a couch. They have a microwave here. My microwave pulls out horizontally. Their microwave opens a door. They both heat food, right? They have a car, I have a car. My wife has a car. Everyone has the same exact thing. So I think you got to be real careful about looking at numbers as a sign of success, because that's a road to nowhere. You can still accumulate net worth, a bunch of things, and you can still be hollow on the inside because you're not achieving your purpose in life. And so I want to be full of purpose and know where I'm heading this year. That's what intentional would mean.
You started off, TC, talking about a couple different words. You talked about aggressive, tenacious, and you were, I think, evaluating at the time that there have been times you've been too aggressive to the point of maybe somebody else's detriment, running somebody over, as though we're playing football. We're going to make that touchdown, and we're going to slam everybody else out of our way to get in my way. And clearly that's not the heart that we want to have when we're living life. And maybe some of that develops because of that idea of scarcity mindset, where there's not enough to go around and I got to get mine. You always know somebody who's been raised in a household with many children, they eat pretty fast.
Yeah.
You know? And
yeah,
because it's, oh man, the food's gone. Once gone, better get in there and get yours. And reminds me of when I was young. I don't know how young, very young. My memory is sitting around the dinner table and there's one last cracker, and my brother wanted that cracker and I wanted that cracker. And I think my mom's idea was I was going to split it. And instead I licked the whole thing. And I got in so much trouble. My mom was not happy because I decided, you know what, I'm taking this. Lick the cracker. And so my brother could not have half of it. And I think that sometimes when we're looking at these goals, I think there's a caution. The caution to us is there are more crackers. It's fine. Like, we can get more crackers. Maybe not tonight, but definitely tomorrow when the stores are open, we can get more crackers. Fine. Instead of, oh, there's one last cracker, I got to get it and you have to sacrifice.
Yeah.
You're going to sacrifice and I'm going to take your sacrifice. Instead, no, there's enough to go around. And I think where I connect that with your thought is the accumulation of wealth with this idea of somebody else, I'm taking it from somebody else, rather than there's plenty to go around. And if I bring value to today, I can be assured, because a principle of the world is that if I create value today, then that is sowing seeds for more value tomorrow. And there's plenty to be created. It's endless.
Right.
And I'm wondering where's that idea of being tenacious, being aggressive, sacrifice, got to get mine. Where's all that sit with you?
So two things come to my mind. One is short, and then I'll get to that, what you just asked me. But it's all about perspective. When you said scarcity mindset, I really think things are all about perspective. Like, for instance, when Jesus took the loaves of bread and were able to feed all the people, the revelation I received from that was maybe he didn't feed all the people with the bread. Maybe he was able to affect their spirit and their mind, so that way they had a different perspective of what being full actually felt. Right. And for instance, if I were feeding my whole family off of a piece of bread, right? And they wanted to lick the bread because they had a scarcity mindset, like you said, if I could get them to see things differently, then we could probably all maintain until tomorrow with that one piece of bread. And so you're right. I think that was a good point. Scarcity mindset versus prosperity mindset or faith mindset. The other thing was where that came from. It's a funny story. It's a short story too, but so when I was working at a telecommunications company, when I was very young, I got promoted like a bunch of times too. They promoted me to be part of their go-to-market strategy as a district sales manager. And I was a young guy. I was 23 years old. And I had a few outside account executives, B2B, and also residential. And one of them, two of them were pastors out of five, two of them. And one of the pastors came to me one day after a meeting. He said, he's from Nigeria. He said, so I'm going to imitate him because I love him. I always love imitating him. So he has a strong voice. He said, TC, you are aggressive to a fault. And I just burst in tears immediately. I just literally bursted into tears. And he said, I want you to come to church. First time I went to church in Rock, literally. I grew up Catholic, and obviously later on in life, I just went my own way. And when I was 23, I went to church with my one of the pastors that worked with me. And it totally changed me. And so to this day, let me say this, about a month ago, he came over to my house. I hadn't seen him in 2 years. Not even a month ago. Yeah, maybe about a month ago. And he sat down with me in my living room. First time he'd ever been in my new home. And I told him that story again. And he got on and started praying over me and said, I want to release you from me. He said, those are my words. I rebuke those words against you. That's not what I meant for you. You were aggressive to a fault, and you are a totally different person today. He said, I've never seen you do anything but help people. You know what I mean? So now what I'm saying this to you is that I've been on both ends of the spectrum, right? And now I feel like some people even tell me, like, you're just too nice. I need you to be a little bit more tenacious because there's things that you can unlock for me too. And intentionality to me, when you sent that text message the other day, Jason, I was all on board with it because this year I cannot allow myself to be docile, complacent. That's not a manifestation of God, right? The manifestation of God is fearlessness, right? Confidence, boldness. And that doesn't mean that I'm aggressive to a fault. It just means I'm going after my goals and I understand who I am and I'm living a life of purpose. So that's what aggressive to the fault actually came from.
There's a tendency in all of us. I had my own version. I've met several other men who have, but there's a tendency in all of us to go from being passive and carefree and just letting life happen to us to the other extreme where we become something. I think the word that I like, that I find most helpful in describing it is predatorial. And to be honest, predators get things done. No question about it. But there is a question of whether how they do things is desirable or appropriate or becoming of us as creatures made in God's image. And I think that's probably the biggest ancient struggle that we all wrestle with is the tendency to lower ourselves to the level of animals when we don't have to, because we're endowed with these gifts of speech and advanced complex thought and all of these things. And when you're setting a goal, if you're in a predatorial mindset, it can take on a lot of forms. I think probably one of the ones that I have certainly been guilty of in the past is I'm going to make millions of dollars so I can show all those people they were wrong. And yeah, I suppose in a way nice to run into somebody who knew me when I was much younger, who maybe thought I wouldn't amount to anything, and say, at least internally, say, "How do you like me now?" But it's not a why. I can't relate to people who get hung up on that as their why. I really have a problem with that. For one thing, there's always a bigger fish, and you reach that milestone, and then what do you do from there? If you're still driven by that same need to prove everybody else wrong, when you reach the goal that you're after, you're going to have a whole new set of problems. You're going to have to prove another bunch of people wrong. And that just goes in circles, if you ask me, until there's nothing left to burn. But if you have the goal, uh, the opposite of predatorial, where you're making yourself useful and helpful and sincerely doing it sincerely towards other people with without any specific expectation of return, but at the same time with a healthy expectancy that God will reward them. It's hard to go wrong with goals like that, because at the end of it, even if you are left holding the bag with nothing in it, which is not what God does, but even if that were the case, you'd stand at the end of it and say, I never compromised my integrity for the fleeting sensation of having achieved something, quote unquote, and descended into a lower state where I was driven by animal instinct or a negative emotion or contempt for others or whatever the case may be. That you can say, I invested my time, my energy, my resources into serving God's other children without expectation or demand of return. And that's it. And you can stand at the end of that and say, and I can keep doing it, however God chooses to reward. But if we really don't want to get wrapped up in predatorial goals, I think is another priority for me. I'm like, I don't want to set goals just for the sake of setting them. I also don't want to come out and set goals that are driven by my lower self, my ego, my need for admiration. As muted as it is now, I don't want to give it a voice at the table.
Which I think goes back to aligning yourself with the right people. Because the recognition, I think, of that lower self or that voice that you don't want to hear, I think is easier. It's easier to recognize that voice in context of other people because they see it. Sometimes I think developing in us before we see it. And that I think then means that we need to align ourselves with folks who can help us develop, which I said this morning, the focus words, part of how I develop focus words or intentions is I think, what if I were parenting myself, what does Jason need now? What's next for Jason's growth? Because I remember thinking of my kids when they were growing up, and they're now mostly grown. I remember thinking various times of their life where like the next thing that needs to develop in this kid is such and such. And I would start working on that part of them in that time over weeks, months, years. And when we become adults, that pressure's let off. Nobody's keeping track. Nobody's keeping track of me. But we need to keep track of ourselves. And I think part of it is looking as a third party onto ourselves as best we can, and then inviting other people into that process to keep us moving in the direction of our development. And that I think takes more than just us. I think it does get back to what you talked about, Paul, of aligning ourselves with other folks. And TC, what you talked about, maybe it's a kind of a pendulum or a learning how to drive around a track, and how much gas do you give it into the turn? And then when you wipe out, you go, oh, wait a second, I can't give it that much gas into that turn because now I'm stuck on the track and everybody's backing up behind me and whatnot. I'm going to get started again. And then I'll figure out how to turn. How fast can I turn? How much gas should I give it? When do I let off? And is the goal to have fun? Is the goal to win the race? Is the goal to knock the other person off the track? What's the goal in that moment for that year, for that time frame? That I think is something to think about.
So I think you're reminding me of a good movie. I saw Gran Turismo on the weekend. So I'm a former gamer. You were asking about planning in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me behind you on the wall here. Can't read it because I'm writing chicken scratches. But I have these columns. I took my kids through a planning session where I actually asked them what things are important to them as they grow. And I think this is pretty cute. So I'm going to read a couple of things.
Yeah. Give it to us.
So one of them is food, learning, family, activities, and wealth. Of course, I guided them as well, right? But these are the 5 core places of value that my kids, my son is, context, Paul. My son is 7 years old, about to be 8 in February, and my daughter's 11, about to be 12 in July. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. So for food, we want to eat less candy, more fruits. Learning, it was like computer skills. My son said coding. They want their own Duolingo so they can learn Spanish. We talked about wealth. My business partner invests in crypto heavily. And so my daughter said something about crypto because she's heard me talking about crypto and Rodrigo. And she's, Rigo can teach us, or I was like, Rigo can show you crypto. And so my activities was like taekwondo, golf, boxing, just different things that they can, now they have a board that I can hold them accountable to. And so not accountable in a way like, hey, I'm not trying to scare them, but I can help them towards the goal if I know that we're on the same page. And so I think the best thing that we can do this year for goal setting for ourselves and teams, right? We need to agree on what the flag actually looks like before we capture it. So that way, when we're going towards the flag, we can have something we can hold accountable to and say, hey, you know what, Jason, this doesn't look like what you said. This is what is happening. Are the actions that you're taking right now going to get you closer to the flag, right? I should be able to ask my kid, for instance, my daughter drew a picture of a plate, protein, veggies, fruits, and grains. So now when I can take a picture of that, and when she's eating, I can show her the picture like, you drew this, you did this. Is this in line with what you said 2024 should look like for you as a young athlete, right? And so just knowing what I think those agreed upon goals or measurements or milestones, or whatever it is, I think once you outline those things, it gives you and your business partner or your business partners the ability to have something that you can point back to say, this is not integrity. This is not tenacity. This is not boldness. This is not faith-based, right? And it's not something that I made for you or something for yourself.
It's the
Very
same.
good.
I saw in a book, books have like little quotes, right? As you begin a chapter. And I don't remember what book this is. And I don't remember. So I'm always weirded out because I'm like, I know this quote, but I never know the book. The quote was very simple. And it said, accountability without which we destroy the best of men. Accountability without which we destroy the best of men. I think sometimes where this connected with me is that sometimes we avoid holding each other accountable because we think we're being kind. And yet, accountability without which we destroy the best of men. We could be great. We could be great model citizens, great family men, great fathers, great business owners. And when we shun accountability or when we are not accountable, we do not walk through our days as though we are accountable. We eventually walk to our own destruction as men. And so when we are, I think when we're thinking about this, I'll say this for myself, when I'm thinking about being intentional and living perhaps this next year in a direction rather than just wandering, as I've said that I've done for years through this process. One of the things I want to pull out is that we do need accountability. And if we think we can do this alone, we are wrong. We are marching to our destruction. And sometimes when we are withholding accountability, perhaps from our children or from each other, we are doing it to our own detriment. We are hurting them. We are hurting ourselves in the long run. So when we say we're moving in a direction, we need to make sure that everybody's on board with that. And if the people in our lives are not on board with that direction, then maybe we need to evaluate whether that direction is really something that is worth going towards, or is it something that they know we're off in our direction. It's not something we should be pushing towards. That's a thought.
This has been awesome. Yeah, good conversation.
There's the obvious things we all want to be accountable about. And then there are these specific things that come from setting meaningful goals that are predatorial, that are driven by the desire to serve God by serving his other children. And those are much more abstract. But they're just like, I remember that quote from Steve Jobs about simplicity. He said, simplicity is one of the hardest things to do. He was talking about branding, I think, but what he meant was he took all sorts of preliminary research and discussion and back and forth and tests and trials and retesting and retrying stuff to get to the point where they had this unified brand language. But once they had it, and that's the rest of his quote, he says, once you have simplicity, it becomes very easy to communicate. And when you're dealing with an Apple product for that very reason. You recognize it instantly. You recognize the feel of it, the look of it, the functionality of it, uniqueness of it. It's the same thing, I think, with goals and those overarching themes, like you mentioned there, TC, because if you have agreement on what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and then it becomes very easy to say, hey, that doesn't look like interdependence on the right people. That looks like you trying to take matters into your own hands, and the hell with everybody else. And if that framework is agreed upon ahead of time, then it also becomes easier for the person who is walking the razor's edge there to say, whoops, I wasn't even paying attention, and back away. Or it becomes, it's not that any of us want this, but it becomes the pretext of, okay, that doesn't look like it's going to last. It looks like I may need to find someone else because we had an agreement, and now this person is walking outside the boundaries of that agreement. And whatever goals you're setting, particularly in partnership with other people, the thing that I've always, not always, but the thing that I've learned the value there is the complex struggle for simplicity that gives that language, right? That unifying common language that one person can say to the other, hey, this is inconsistent with what we said we were going to do. And the other person says, oh, yeah, now that you mentioned it, I hadn't even thought about that. And then, okay, back to the drawing board.
That was spot on, Paul. And I wish I could add to that. Again, thinking.
Well, I felt like I was rambling a little bit.
No, it's good. We are winding down on the time that we allot for this 1 hour of the workshop here on this fine Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024. We have an entire year ahead of us, which is long enough to create some urgency, long enough that we can actually get a lot done. We could accomplish a lot of things this year. And it's short enough to create a bit of urgency. Now, for me, I think maybe what we could do at the last couple minutes, take 30 seconds or whatever, and give us a recap of what your recommendation would be for somebody who's thinking about setting a goal and setting intentions, processing all the things that we've talked. what's the one thing that stands out for you from that you're going to take into this coming year? So think about that. I'll go first since I don't want to put anybody else on the spot. The direction that I'm leaning in for this year is I think it turns into focus. I'm still processing what the phrase or the word's going to be, but it's something about focus, like remaining on focus, remaining on target, keeping the direction, setting a good pace, somewhere around that, which is sort of tongue in cheek. The phrase I'm thinking about is stop effing off and just evaluating everything in that. Is the thing I'm doing right now moving me in the direction that I say I want to go, where I want to be a year from now? And if it's not, maybe this is a detour that I'm really just effing off.
I think it was good. I think for me, my process is going to be pray, purpose, Pareto process. I'm literally going to pray before I make a move. I'm going to ensure that my purpose is aligned with what I heard from God. And then I'm going to make sure that I live a life of Pareto's principle where I'm literally working on 80% of my time is spent, towards the top 20% of value. And then I want to make sure that everything is done in decency and order. So process is going to be very important. So yeah, those are the 4 tenets I'm going to live by for 2024.
So that was pray, purpose, Pareto. What was the fourth one?
Process.
Process. All right.
Organization. Yeah. Process.
Thanks, TC. What about you, Paul?
Mine is predicated on sorting through the tolerables and intolerables, knowing what you want, knowing what you don't want, and then from that list distilling what you do want, and then running it through the ringer of being interdependent with the right people, whether that's from just the perspective of discussing goals and refining them and thinking about them and questioning them and all that, or in our case, it's actually working on them together.
Yeah.
But in either case, it doesn't do any good to just make them up for myself unless they're entirely encased in my personal being. Nobody else can really be involved with it. And then the third thing, of course, is to do it all for the glory of God, to do it in a benevolent and non-predatorial state of mind, measured primarily by how much output did I exert versus how many dollars did I make, or how many times did I ring the bell and get the piece of cheese, carrot and stick sort of thing. Yeah, for my encouragement for setting goals is to go through those routes, because that's what helps you to eliminate goals for their own sake and goals that you try to accomplish on your own without any accountability, and also goals that are predatorial and don't have and lack the key ingredients of love and respect and benevolence towards your fellow man.
Good stuff. We're at the end of our hour for the workshop, first week of January 2024. I wrote down all of the stuff that we're talking about for your goals, and I wrote down mine. And I think it'd be interesting when we follow up on these over the coming weeks and months, whether we are staying true to the direction that we said that we wanted to stay true to. Because as we talk about here in the community for this business accelerator, if we have a product, service, or message we believe is going to change the world, we have to get good at delivering that product, service, or message. And if we don't, we're not only doing ourselves a disservice, perhaps misusing the gifts that we have and the resources that we've been given or developed, but we also are not creating, I think we're not creating in the world the value that we could create. And I think that gets back to why are we here? And that's something to ponder at a different time. But anyhow, thanks, gentlemen, for being here on the workshop. Our faculty members, T.C. Bell and Paul Edwards. And I'm Jason Todd. And it's great to have you guys.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
gentlemen. Happy New Year to you.
Happy
Talk
New
to you.
Year.